Here's how people with addiction can cope during the cost of living crisis, by Professor Nigel MacLennan. Overcoming your addiction. Why do some people become addicted and others don't? Every year, many people are killed by their addictions, while others, with the same or even more severe addictions, turn things around. Why? What makes the difference between life and death? In over 35 years of providing psychotherapy, I have yet to meet a person who is drug or alcohol addicted and who is not engaged in self-medication. Indeed, most forms of addiction, in my experience, have a large element of self-medication, if medication is used to mean a method to cope with or ameliorate some kind of physical, social, spiritual, or emotional pain. Most addictions that start off as self-medication, whether that is chemical escapism or behavioral reassurance, soon become self-harming. Social scientists around the world are aware of the cocktail of social factors that determine health outcomes. They are known as the social determinants of health, SDOH. That is, factors such as poverty, homelessness, poor education, and stigma of all kinds make addictions more likely to be lethal. At the other end of the scale, affluent, well-educated, well-supported professionals are more likely to obtain the necessary support to either contain or overcome their addiction. Many people claim that addiction is a brain disease. If that were the case, we would be able to point to the pathogen that causes the disease. Of course, no such pathogen exists. Most addictions start off as self-medication for a problem and end up being a problem of self-medication. The journey to addiction is well documented and seems to follow the same stepped pattern regardless of the nature of the addiction. A trigger, introduction to or initiation into the addictive substance or behavior, exploration of the addictive substance or behavior and experimentation with it as self-medication, increasing frequency of usage until self-medication becomes regular or habitual. What started out as a short-term and helpful amelioration of emotional pain reaches the tipping point of risky usage. Once past the tipping point, dependency sets in all senses of the word. The person no longer controls the habit controls the person. After a period in that state, full-blown addiction is consolidated and becomes part of the person's identity. In this phase, the person is gripped by the 4 C's: compulsion, craving, loss of control, and adverse consequences. That is not a pleasant place to be. How does an economic squeeze, in the current case called a cost of living crisis, impact people with addictions? If they are affluent and addicted to something like cocaine, with the huge list of harms that cocaine causes, the street price of their preferred narcotic can decrease because of reduced demand. If the addict lives in relative poverty, the price is likely to reduce in an economic crisis, meaning that they can continue to use their chosen form of self-medication. However, some addicts will experience a worsening of their own financial circumstances and may feel that crime is the only way to feed their addiction. By its nature, it is nearly impossible to determine how much acquisitive crime is committed for the purposes of acquiring money for drugs. Reliable estimates from crime specialists indicate that around 50% of all acquisitive crime, burglary, fraud, is committed in connection with or for the purposes of furthering addictions. People with any form of addiction can interpret the cost of living crisis as a reason for more despair or as an opportunity to regain control of their lives. Anyone who's addicted or who has worked with addicted people knows that overcoming addiction is difficult. One of the many compounding factors that make overcoming addiction so hard is that for a long time, the addict has sought comfort from whatever it is they are addicted to. The prospect of even getting through a day without that comfort is, to them, inconceivable. Obtaining comfort from another source is essential if recovery is going to happen. For many successfully recovered addicts, the new comfort is sought out and adopted after a tipping point, when an absolute new low is reached. In that moment of despair, some can see where their addiction is leading and become motivated to make the choice to go in the opposite direction. They draw new comfort from knowing that life can and will be much better without the source of their addiction. They choose to change. They choose to turn their lives around. Many ex-addicts go on to great achievements, while others aspire and help many people to the same recovery. For some current addicts, the cost of living crisis will be that tipping point. If so, what can addicts do to regain control of their lives? Create and reinforce a big why. Create and reinforce a big why. People who overcome adversity almost always have a compelling reason to do so. There is something they want, and that something, in the case of addicts, is hugely more important than whatever they were addicted to. One person I helped, the parent of a 9-year-old child, held 3 pictures in their mind as their way to develop healthy, smoke-free lungs. Their child's university graduation day, their child's wedding day, and the birth of their first grandchild. None of those momentous events the person would live to see if they continued with their heavy smoking. Link overcoming the addiction to the big why. Kicking any self-destructive behavior is achieved one day, one decision at a time. The successful ex-addict links their big why to every decision they take. If they are tempted, they remind themselves of their big goal. Identify addictive behavior triggers. People who overcome addictions learn what externally triggers their addictive behaviors and ensure that those triggers are no longer part of their lives. They know that some of their triggers are internal and plan how to deal with them. Some successful ex-addicts go as far as reassigning the triggers to increase their resolve. For instance, one person I helped with a food addiction that led to obesity turned hunger pains into a reinforcing trigger of their determination. If my stomach is rumbling between meals, that means I am achieving my goal. Build commitment to recovery. Some ex-addicts have an incident that is their instant tipping point. Others set themselves a date to change their lives, gradually build commitment, and work towards that day. A new life date is the best option if there is no natural tipping point. Set up a support network. Many addicts choose to create a new group of friends and mutual supporters after deciding on recovery. Those new friends quickly become positive triggers, reinforcers of the new lifestyle. New friends and supporters also mean not having anything to do with the people or places that were triggers of the addiction previously. Remove all temptation. Many people who may be tempted to drink alcohol at home decide not to have any in their living space. Those who may be tempted to call their drug dealer delete those details. People who know they will binge on biscuits won't have any biscuits at home. Ex-addicts behave that way towards the former object of their addiction. They remove all temptation. In a cost of living crisis, removing the temptation to spend money on the addiction can make a huge difference in making financial ends meet. Activity replacement. Stopping harmful behavior that previously occupied much time can leave a huge vacuum in a person's life. Successful ex-addicts fill that time hole with constructive, healthy activities. Acquire or develop empowering tactics to deal with temptation. Not all temptations and triggers can be removed. Successful recovery involves adopting and mastering coping strategies to deal with the temptation. For many addicts, the cost of living crisis could be the event they have been waiting for to turn their lives around. Necessity is the mother of invention became a cliché for good reasons. It contains much truth. If you or anyone you know has an addiction, will the cost of living crisis be, to use another piece of folk wisdom, the cloud that has a silver lining?